What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Non-Gamers React to Video Game Music, where I share video game music with non-gamers, or in this case, re-invite people who are willing to come back to listen to more video game music. You just had a full day of teaching, and now you're here, and it's a Friday at the time of filming this. Could be anywhere.
Yep.
You're wasting 2 hours of your life.
Teaching, heard some auditions, did some practice. Usually it's good to end the day listening to some music, so.
That's fair. And today, I had 628 requests, or well, I asked the community for a bunch of music, because I hear a lot of music now, and I can't remember any of it.
Right. Yeah, overload. Yeah.
People seem to really love saxophone music in gaming. Last time I showed you some, like, you know, sort of like a mostly sax, but then there was some hodgepodge stuff. Today is all saxophone, baby. We're going through MIDI, we're doing orchestral, we're doing brand new, we're doing jazz, we're doing funk. A lot of these songs I don't even know. So we're going to explore this together. Why don't you give everybody who hasn't watched your previous video that they can watch here, and I'll forget to post it here, of course. Give them the 90-second version of who Dan Grazer is.
So I play the side of the instrument that's a little bit more obscure. So I'm a classical saxophonist. I play soprano in my saxophone quartet, the Cinta Quartet. And I also teach saxophone at Grand Valley State University here in Western Michigan. Marco and I were music students together at the Crane School of Music in Potsdam, and hallway mates, actually, in the same dorm. Yeah, good times. It was the best of times. And, you know, I try to be a voracious listener to different types of music, so I'm mainly classical music focused. But as he said, I haven't really been a gamer at all. So last time was a very good education into just how much has progressed in video game music as well. Because the last video game system I was familiar with was N64, you know, so everything has come a long way, but the scores in particular have come a long way too. So I'm looking forward to hearing some more.
Have you listened to any since we last spoke?
I have a bit, because in the last video, there were hundreds of comments about, you know, some of the usual, I can't believe you didn't play that, and all the usual, but there's some really very educated responses. So you've got a very curious, in the best of ways, and a very, let's say, educated audience that you have in your YouTube channel.
Well, thank you. It's you know, the audience follows the creator. So no, but seriously, like, I agree, and I think, like, it's really cool that I can sort of be like, hey, I have an XYZ player on tomorrow. What's XYZ track? And they just show up. And it's really exciting. And sorry for those of you that aren't going to have your tracks played. I literally have 20 tabs. We only have 2 hours, so we do our best. It's a little bit of a mixture of a soundscape that maybe you know from the N64 era. There's also some, like, big heavy hitters here that we didn't get to include last time. Yeah, so if you want to watch more selections that include saxophone, then check out that video from a year ago, because I know a lot of people asked for Jack-a-Dandy, which we actually listened to last time that I forgot. All right, so this actually is a game that came out recently called Clair Obscur Expedition 33. It's a very much a beautiful, actually cried quite a bit, a story of family and grief and, you know, life and the purpose of existence, and it's made by the French, you know, if the French were real, of course, but, you know, anyway. This is called Monoko. Do you like is that fun to do?
It's fun and it's easy to do on saxophone. They always give us those nice ornamented lines there. So like we were talking last time, I think, where in ensembles like that are more jazz focused, saxophones tend to take the place of like what strings are in an orchestra. We always get the most ornamented stuff, and I like that there's using a full saxophone section there, and alternating with the solo is really nice. So those are always fun to play, just doing those scale patterns up and down. And it worked really well on that tune. I thought it was nice, simple delivery, overlapped really well. So yeah, that was a good example of kind of like, a mainstream to somewhat of like a disco or funk sort of like saxophone sound, going on there.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a pure saxophone experience. How often do we get that in like modern instrumentation, whatever the genre? Like how frequently are we getting sort of like saxophone sort of, because this came out like a year ago. Like, this character is really beloved. It's actually, I don't want to spoil it too much, but essentially this is a dog character, which is why you hear the bow wow wows at the beginning, and he's kind of like, he's very self-assured. He's a dog. He's like, well, he likes to eat feet. It's very like a kind of art piece. It's they're inside of a. Well, I'm so afraid to spoil anything. I was about to spoil the whole game for someone who's never played it, so I need to be careful. Yeah, but like, is it common to have this type of sound in a modern era?
Usually in bits and pieces. It's normally not like the dominant sound of things, because that sort of music these days can, if it's done a certain way, can sometimes sound a little bit dated. But if it's done like sparingly as one track or like one area or something like that, it's quite effective, especially if it's right for the scene or it's right for the character, to have that sort of sound. But what is kind of rare on soundtracks, at least, is to have that sounded like it, at the most, I think there was like maybe 3 or 4 saxophone parts when it was overlapping like that. That's relatively rare. Normally, we're like the garnish, and we get like a saxophone solo. We're the adornment to it. So it's actually kind of rare to have a full section of it, or at least full section writing.
Did you like that piece as a piece? Was that something you'd want to play?
Yeah, I like that. Especially, I thought the solo playing was fine, but I did like the fact that they used a full-on section, and I think it had, it used the saxes really well. Saxophone
is an interesting instrument because it's predominant and everyone kind of knows it, but it's also rare enough where they don't know it at the same time. Like it's like, it's like a neighbor of like down the street. You're like, hey, Bob.
Right.
See you sometimes.
It's also sometimes that neighbor whose house you shouldn't go near. The saxophone is also can be a sketchy instrument. No, I'm kidding. But the it's we're used to it in a lot of contexts. But again, if you're primarily listening to orchestral or even soundtracks, you'll only hear it once in a while. Mm-hmm. But, when you go to music school, you're used to, there's a saxophone studio and there's quartets and there's bands, so if you were a band nerd like I was in high school, of course, there's always saxophones. There's a gazillion of them in every marching band, We're used to getting the hand in rehearsals. Saxophones, I appreciate the enthusiasm. That'll do. We're supposed to hear clarinets and flutes too, But then, once you get to like the classical music world, we're still seen as a novelty. My quartet's been together now for 16 years, and we're still every single concert season. We're playing at some concert series that's been around for 100 years that has never had saxophone on it before.
Oh my God.
Depending on the context, we can be widely known. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you heard Kenny G everywhere, so you're used to, soprano saxophone. But in certain contexts like soundtracks, it's still somewhat of like the black sheep, at least of the Woodwind family.
Clarinet is probably the son of the Woodwind family.
It's hard to say because, the double reeds have been around forever. We have records of the Greeks, playing double reed instruments, and flutes in some form have been around for tens of thousands. We keep finding bone flutes in caves and whatnot. Yeah. So as we talked a little bit about saxophone like history last time, our instrument came about in 1840. The guy Adolf Sax debuted it in the 1840s. So we're after Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and missed out on like the formation of the symphony orchestra. So we are the newest of the Woodwind family. So as a result, it's the instrument makes the most sense. The fingerings make the most sense. It's also acoustically speaking, probably the most flexible of the woodwind family. Like we can really be a chameleon. That's why, you can hear a classical saxophone that sounds like strings or sounds like, whatever. And then everyone knows it as like the quintessential jazz or pop or rock and roll even instrument. It can really do all of that because it came about after all the others, and the instrument itself was invented to bridge the gap between the winds and the brass, hence why it's a woodwind instrument, but it's made out of brass. So we've always been kind of like the woodwind family chameleon is usually the way I phrase it.
So cool, though. It's interesting because, like, when you look at the woodwinds, like, even picturing them in my mind, the saxophone has the most gravitas. The most like it has the most like I don't know the sheen and the way it looks under the lights, the jazz lights, like and even it's just like even its shape, like it's interesting how I mean obviously comparing it to like a bassoon is not the same, but like I don't know, it's cool. You're right, it definitely is a chameleon, and I think we have some examples in here, not just jazz stuff in here. But let's go to a MIDI saxophone. So this is from Ace Attorney, which is a game about solving crime, and you play a lawyer. It's like a visual novel, so like you read along, there's like the famous objection, and you have to like piece together the crimes, as far as I know. I've never played one. I probably should. But this is Godot's theme or Godot's theme, The Fragrance of Dark Coffee. Sometimes I'll play this older music and folks will be like, well, no one cares about that. It was like, bro, but that music exists. Like it's real. Like we gotta talk about it. We gotta talk about MIDI. MIDI is a fundamental part of the history of music. Like, hello, you can't just play like the greatest hits all the time. And I find one of the interesting problems with introducing non-gamers is that we default to wanting it to be, well, let me play this and let me play this. Let me play like the top 40, right? And it's like, but the vastness of it, even just in 40 years, is mind-boggling. We're both entrenched in the classical world, but we're also in a modern space because, a saxophone is a modern instrument. There's always new compositions, even though it's, Black Sheep and all that other stuff, much in the same way that like every day a new soundtrack's coming out. So, it's interesting, like, we kind of have to thread the needle from like what was happening when the saxophone was really created and started becoming a symphonic instrument all the way to, the etymology of jazz and so on and so forth. I find that really interesting.
It's important to provide context too. I mean, and the top 40 and what's trending, just wait 2 weeks and it'll be something different. So just always going with, like what's hot at the moment. Like, yeah, that's important. But, knowing the history, especially when it covers a few different genres, because, a lot of times if you have a really influential piece or an influential score or whatever that uses something a certain way, that becomes how people use that instrument. They gorge themselves on it. And then, okay, we've had enough of that. All right, let's try something different, So it is important to provide the context. And, we can't ignore that, that MIDI saxophone, MIDI instruments were a thing, for a while. And the technology a lot of times dictates the result you get. That's just how it is. And so it is always important to provide context, even if certain people think it's dated or it's
historical
like, oh, that's
context, you mean, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that you're able to appreciate, where the music is at right now by knowing where it was. There's plenty of, as you can imagine, there's plenty of classical music that exists that is useful to teach, but maybe classical music listeners don't listen to on a regular basis. I don't spend a whole lot of time. I'll confess, I really don't listen to Bach cantatas a whole lot. I'm just rarely in the mood for that, even though they're hugely important pieces. I know that seems like literal blasphemy to say because they're sacred works. But in fact, my favorite one that he wrote is his coffee cantata, which he dedicated to the coffee shop that he had. So it's entirely secular and it's got a goofy, plot to it. But, there's plenty of that in the classical music where it's like, yeah, it's useful to teach. There's some really trend-setting things that happen. But do we listen to it regularly? No, but you should be aware of it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I just saw a list today that was like, I don't really buy into it, but it was like, we asked you for what you view as the top most influential games, and there's nothing pre-2014. And I'm like, oh, no.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We're cooked. Because what? Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. There's two out of 10. And I'm like, there's no way that every single best game that's ever come out is besides these two is from 2014 on. I just can't buy it. I can't buy it. But also, maybe we've really become unks, like maybe that's this, you work with Gen Z all the time.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I feel 1,000 years old half the time I'm in lessons. Yeah.
I got some people the other day that were like, man, this guy's really bad. He's not, don't worry. He's not good at video games. I'm like, bro, what the fuck? Like what? Anyway, so also, how rare is it for us to get to sit down with an actual saxophone player and talk about MIDI saxophone?
Yeah.
Kind of really rare. So this is Godot's theme from The Fragrance of Dark Coffee. Maybe it'll sound like that Bach piece you like. We'll see. Probably not.
I mean, that's a sound that all of us got used to in the, the late 80s, early 90s, when that electronic version of saxophone was always geared much towards the kind of like the pop / like smooth jazz sort of tone quality. So you hear there's, even in something that's entirely digital, there's a lot of, you hear simulated reed noise in it.
Yeah.
It's not like a completely pure sound. There's a lot of like nasal quality to it. And what it sounds like is this, whoever this composer is, it's kind of like they're composing out of like a slow ballad sort of thing. Yeah. And because of the nature of the technology, it's a little bit, say, more square than you would play this, in a normal like jazz combo setting. There would be a lot of pushing and pulling of time. I hear they tried to program in a couple of little slides up there. There's some little glissando moments, which were, I appreciate the effort. They're not exactly the way that sounds, but A for effort, maybe C for delivery, but anyway. Yeah. So if you were to hear someone like an actual live group play that, there would be a little bit more hanging on the back. The only issue I usually had with MIDI saxophone, which is what I kind of heard there, is that really there's about like one type of articulation that it does. It's this very do di do di do di do. It's hard. The technology just wasn't there. Now they really can program a number of different styles, different articulations. But yeah, what it sounds like kind of a square presentation of a somewhat moody ballad,
To me, it sounds like someone's sitting at the piano and they have the saxophone sound on the Casio. I know it's not more complex than that probably, but it's like ba-bee, ba-bee, ba-dee, da-da. And what I find interesting is that I do get, I mean, we have a picture of Godot here, so like I'm assuming this, he's got whatever face thing on, and he's obviously in a nice vest, and his tie is really propped up, so he's clearly like a sort of like a clever guy, right? Like there's obviously you get that, but what I find is that there's like a lack of direction in that really bothers me, because it just kind of, it feels like it's just like it's trying to be jazzy and play into it, but it doesn't go anywhere per se. It just stays very hear, which I find kind of difficult to listen to. As I get older, I find myself drawing more and more towards very melodic or very lyrical, at the very least, very legato and very lyrical pieces. Is it good? I don't know what that means, you know, but like, would I put that on? No. Would I want to hear it live? Absolutely. Like that would be really cool to hear in a live presentation. Cause also you're right. Cause it's like the leaning in, you know, that sort of that synergy between like a trio or something would be really cool.
Yeah, and that's like I said, it seems a little square. That there wasn't a whole lot of like development to it. It was, as you said, here are the motives, and it locked in rhythmically. You know, it sounded very somewhat mechanical. And when you're playing in a jazz style at this tempo, you're not thinking mechanical. You're not thinking of locking it in. You're allowing lots of freedom, you know, even within the beat. So, it's a product of its time. It's foundational. It's simple. If it were to actually be jazz, there would need to be a lot more development in the ideas, you know. But that's, as you say, probably this person may not even be a saxophonist. They probably were sitting at a keyboard or something and just had the sound on and came up with one or two ideas, overlapped them, put some rhythm behind it, and then, you know, there you go. So simple, not quite really what I would call jazz.
I appreciate, like you said, it's cool that the effort's there, and you clearly like the desire to, like, you know, tell a story musically is present. Honestly, sometimes that's all that you really need, even if it's, you know, maybe not as spicy or fleshed out, I guess. So we just listened to Godot's theme. Let's listen to Gormont theme this is the four-limbed Titan Gormont from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Torna. I don't know what this sounds like. I've never heard it. I hope there's saxophone in this. I don't even know. Okay. What did you think of that?
That's a very strong recommendation. That's a great track, and so that was a soprano saxophone, and it's actually used really well. The range was used really well. The melodic writing was very strong. Usually, a lot of times soprano sax is either used exclusively in like a smooth jazz way, or it's kind of like a sound effect machine. It's rarely just used for like its beautiful sound and lyrical playing. And whoever was playing that is very good. I mean, that's a really good track. So I really liked it. There's good variety there. Some good development. And the orchestration was good. You could hear all the parts, and it wasn't too muddy. It didn't get clogged up, and the saxophone sat on top of that and was going around it really well. So I thought, really strong playing and strong writing.
It's amazing how I feel like anybody can pick out the fact that that's a strong player. Like the fact that as we ascend up and we climbed up there in that middle section, I remember I saw both of our eyebrows go, okay. Like it's like you can kind of tell. And also too, what I find interesting is that, Xenoblade does this a lot because there's, at least in the first game that I'm currently playing, there's this balance between mechanical and natural. I don't know how this is in the second game, but like this is the second track I've heard from this. This is an expansion, an additional piece of content for the second game. And what's interesting is that this, and there's another one called Battle, and they're heavily jazz inspired. Battle is more like a 70s sort of like up tempo piece, whereas this was interesting because it actually imbued that with the orchestra and the orchestral jazz. Is that something that's common? Do you hear that a lot out and about? Jazz and like a mixture of jazz fusion with orchestral sort of, it's like pseudo big band kind of.
A little bit, yeah. You do hear that. It's kind of like that's the sound of at least the chords that were being used and the sounds there were kind of like 90s and early 2000s, like that fusion of a little bit of pop music with jazz. And nowadays, that's what a lot of jazz majors do when they graduate. They're not leaving and just playing the same standards that we've had forever. A lot of them are doing fusion with, pop, rock, indie, all that sort of thing. And so that had kind of like that vibe to it of, a little bit of like Pat Metheny sort of era jazz, and where there's hints of minimalism in there. There was hints of more like commercial / pop sort of melodic writing, but there was a pretty good core of actual jazz writing for that. And using strings and orchestral instruments always makes for a really interesting record. And that's been done pretty much in every era of jazz, like the foundational one that used strings. I mean, Charlie Parker cut a famous album, Charlie Parker with Strings, which is still one of my favorite all time. A recent one that, folks could check out was done by James Snydero, and he did an album with strings and just really gorgeous jazz flute and saxophone playing with orchestral instruments. And it's fun hearing them in that context. A lot of times when you'll hear that sort of writing is in soundtracks. There's not a whole lot like really being pumped out in that style for orchestra. And it's usually what happens a lot is that you'll get a tour of a certain group and they want to be featured with symphony orchestras. So someone will cobble together a full program of arrangements around their tunes. And sometimes, even if the tunes are great, if the arrangements suck, then the whole concert sucks and no one wants, So when you get that like symphonic jazz or symphonic, a lot of times those are put together for like touring programs these days. Because I've played on a few of those where like R&B artists will do a tour within orchestral venues and they'll have the symphony play behind them. So that to me was like a good like jazz indie, little bit of minimalism, it's kind of like fusion going on there, but exceptional playing.
Yeah, 1,000%. I loved the back half too, and we had the percussion and the piano solos, and you had the sax going.
Yeah.
So I've been watching Cowboy Bebop. Normally wouldn't do this, and if you guys want to check this out, it's on patreon.com/MarcoMeatball, completely free. You don't have to sign up for anything. It's just Dan is a saxophone player, and I just feel an obligation to play tank. So if you want to check it out, it's over on Patreon. So some people were talking about this. So this is from a game called Bayonetta, and you play a femme fatale. This song is called Let's Dance, Boys. Apparently there's saxophone, bro. Like I don't know any. I've not known a single, other than the fucking anime track. Sorry, I don't want to swear, make you look bad in front of any students that watch this.
They get much worse in their lessons.
Jesus. Okay.
No. I grew up in New York, and the teacher I studied with at Michigan, I mean, he used swears as like punctuation. So no, they're used to it.
Well, they say that you can trust a person who swears a lot. So for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is Let's Dance, Boys. I don't know. I'm sure I've heard it. I think I played Bane. I don't even remember. Well, I guess hopefully it doesn't suck. Here we go. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I don't know. That's gonna just a little taste of that one. Thoughts?
Yeah, what I think they did well there is that there's the wordless female singers, the background singers, and that was overlapping well with the saxophone section there. So it almost like the saxophone section was another like group of background singers most of the time, because it wasn't really like super ornamented writing.
Right.
You know, that was mainly like, it was almost like a sound effect, like a call and response between the actual female singers and then saxophones imitating, the kind of like vocal gestures. So, but yeah, that's right out of the, disco plus techno, and all that sort of thing, that influence. That's exactly what saxophones are used for in that style of music.
It's so crazy though, because like you would think that like it's such a unique thing that we literally like 2 songs ago we heard, the Xenoblade or a song ago we heard that incredibly complex Xenoblade Chronicles saxophone solo, like crazy jazz ensemble, small group ensemble, and then you fast forward and then here we are, and we're I imagine as a player if you're ba-da ba-da I can't imagine that's going to stress you out too much, but it's interesting how, again, we were talking about at the very beginning how diverse the saxophone sort of range is and what it's used for, and I guess that's a prime example right there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, in that one, the saxophones were essentially rhythm and a little bit of color against the background vocals, which, yep, we've been used for that. So is it the most like interesting saxophone writing? Nope, but it works for that context. That's what you need. Just looping crazy chromatic stuff would not sound right, over that. So the delivery was simple, but that's how we're used a lot of the time.
As a player, do you mind playing something like that? Or do you find, you don't care as long as you're jamming out?
No, I think that if it's written well for the section and we sound good, I think that works great, for essentially what's a fun dance track, You want to play the role correctly. It's not always about, having your own spotlight, having your own
spotlight. You're not the main character all the time. Yeah, I know.
Right. Exactly. So it's sometimes, depending on the days, that type of music is fun to play. Like I've played in dance bands. I've played in, funk bands. I played in a wedding band. And your job is for whoever's listening, to make their experience the best it can be. And whether it's just, dancing around in like a club, or if it's their wedding day, or if it's a chamber music concert, you want to deliver your absolute best. And saxophone writing of that type, if it's written well for the section, that's still fun to play, even though it's not particularly difficult or demanding. It's still fun.
All right, we're going to go to, speaking of one of those like top 40 hits, I've got two. They're from Mario. You know Mario Kart because you've played the N64.
Oh, yeah.
But
that's one I know.
Now I have to change the title to In 20 Years.
That's right.
No clickbait here. But we need to go to Mario Kart 8. And Mario Kart 8, this is Dolphin Shoals and Big Blue. These two are like, Dolphin Shoals specifically is like, I don't even remember if I'm sure I've heard it. Like, it's one of those things that like you just know it if you're within the gaming space at all. But I don't think I've ever sat down and actually listened to Dolphin Shoals. So. Oh. In one breath? Damn. Oh. Isn't that flat? Yeah. All right. So I have questions before I ask your opinion. So obviously the upper notes, I mean, it's impressive the jump up and the leap up and to go up in there. Obviously it's not funny, but it's kind of funny. Obviously to my ear, what's happening is because this is basically a 3-minute free form jazz, just do whatever you want to do kind of piece. Obviously there's a repeat there. When it goes up into the upper register, does it go flat because there's too much of that press into the embouchure and too much of how does the mechanism work in order to get a flat pitch? Because it's different than in the voice where you just totally overshoot or undershoot the note. Like, how does it work with the saxophone? Plus it's insanely high. I mean, that's like a high C. It's got to be a high E.
It is very high. And that's in our altissimo register, what it's called, so altissimo just meaning very high.
Very high.
Yeah, exactly.
Extra high.
Right. So that's a technical word, but it's like, very high. How I know it's not really rocket science. But anyway, so what's going on is that he was adding a lot of vocal inflection. So he was sliding into those notes quite a bit. Right. And the way you do that on saxophone is actually, it's not really embouchure based in that register. It's mostly based on the position of your throat. What we know as voicing, saxophone voicing. Yeah. And so when you hear that sliding up to the note or like bending a bit on it, what they're doing is they're changing the shape of their tongue and their vocal tract so that the face will probably look very similar, but you get kind of like a change of vowel. You know, so it's almost like if you morph from one vowel to the next, that's kind of what voicing is. So like in that register, for example, if you're going from like the normal second octave into the altissimo register, you might think of like manipulating an oo to an e, like ooh.
So it's an E up top? You're going into an E?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and
that's
so
the tightest. That's the most constrictive, though.
Kind of. It's weird because the tongue will go up in the mouth a little bit, but actually you create a little bit more space down here at the base of the tongue. So the opening changes here, and then you shift the shape up here. The only it ends up feeling when you like speak it actually ends up sounding like throat singing, you know, because that's essentially what you're doing. It's like you have and you get that overtone popping out, and so that's that control of that vocal tract. That's how our upper register is produced, you know, because you can only bite the embouchure so much before you just strangle that reed and it won't vibrate anymore. So it's actually there's a bit of voicing there, but that's another phenomenal solo. That is clearly a professional alto player, you know, and there's a lot of, you know, genres within that because, you know, it's a pretty straight ahead tune. But there's elements of there's some funk in there. There's some smooth jazz sort of inflections there and just some really good, just straight ahead, some bebop licks and whatnot. He had, I guess what I heard a few times, at least in his solo playing was, or their solo playing, I don't know who it was, in that they used a lot of what are called enclosure tones, enclosure notes, which all that means when you're improvising in jazz, you want to decide when you're going to land on chord tones. And then to sort of ornament that moment when you're going to get there, you add upper and lower neighbor notes. And so you heard a few of those little looping patterns, that sort of thing around the chord. And so I thought the soloist, whoever this is, made really good use of that. That and also the previous one that we listened to in the big band setting, I mean, that is some really top level saxophone playing. You know, that's not just like, oh, that's fun, that's light, that's actually a pretty high level solo that person played. So, and as you remarked on, their ability to get in and out of that top register, you know, not many people were able to do that even like 30, 40 years ago. You know, there was a handful of soloists who could really make that register work in a solo like this. Now we're hearing it in video game music, for crying out loud. I mean, it's impressive. You know,
that's cool.
That did not happen on Mario Kart N64. I can promise that. I never heard that back in 2002 or whatever. So
I can't stop thinking about that because you're talking about the vocalization and the vowel modification, because it's you know, vowel modification is like a fundamental part of it. It's very interesting that if I were to ever attempt to sing an E on a B flat, I would immediately constrict my vocal cords and constrict the whole apparatus. So for us, it was always like yeah. Or I remember when they'd say, instead of going, oh God, it would be like, instead of going, qui son, you know, in La Bohème and Que Gelle Manina, you'd go, que son, qui sa. You open up, and anything open, you never go E. And so you're like, no, actually to get up there, you gotta go E. And I'm like, oh God, crazy.
Yeah, thankfully we don't have to vocalize while doing it. But yeah, that's... It's exactly right, where certain vowels are possible in the top register as a singer. I did a deep dive on that with a friend who trained in opera singing, and he was studying kind of like some of the older Italian schools, one of which being the Arturo Melocchi. That's the one. The very lowered larynx sort of position where, you know, they would train. I know they train baritones this way. Maybe they did with tenors, but to start with just and to get that to really place that low and almost turning it into a yawn, like
I basically studied Melocchi inadvertently.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Melocchi technique is crazy because it's all about that dark sort of like, you know, and then, you know, one of the coolest things about going into the upper register, and I don't know if this is like a general tenor thing, but it was definitely something that I sort of picked up while I was studying at AVA, was the idea of biting into the apple. And so as you go up, you have to kind of, it's like upper teeth pop out. It's just so, you know, these are the things that like only masochists learn this shit. You know, like, the road to perfection is paved with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I'll say that much. And you never actually get there, which was partly why I'm glad I retired, because it's just like it's too much. It's too much to try to actually. You know what I finally have started singing again, and
Oh, cool.
I was like, I'm almost 40. You know what I could start singing now? Is Il Trovatore.
Oh yeah, okay. Doing
So
some
I was like-
heavy Verdi. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that
Yeah.
would have been my jam, and I would definitely would have blown my chords out by 50. But I mean, it would have been fun as hell.
Oh yeah.
So staying within Mario Kart, let's go to Big Blue. I'll pause this there, but that has to be virtuosic, right? Like that's
Yep.
that seems preposterously hard.
Yes, in some ways, actually, some of that soloing is easier, and I'll say why. But still, that's super high level sax. I think that's the same person.
It's got to be. He redeemed himself.
There's the because of the articulation and where they tend to hang out in the range. I think that's the same person. So essentially, the ornamented lines there were the soloist like mimicking electric guitar shredding most of the time. So it was less about like hyper ornamenting chords, because in like rock music of this type, you know, a lot of times the chords are less complex and you're allowed a little bit more freedom to just sort of, you know, do these crazy, you know, chromatic licks. Or in that case, it was a little bit more gestural. It was almost like, you know, really aggressive, like heavy metal, like singing, you know, where there's a lot of grit in the sound. You go up to the high note and there's a lot of tension to it. And you heard, you know, he did a couple of those where it sounded like he was, or whoever this was just like taking that electric guitar feel and like translating it through like these really ornamented saxophone lines. So yeah, I thought it's a totally different style than the previous one. There was a little, as you said, there's a rock influence there. There's some blues licks thrown in, some bop licks in there, but less like funk and more like straight ahead metal rock sort of feel. So yeah, that's a lot of fun. I'm definitely going to Google who this saxophonist is, because this is, it's got to be like a main studio or commercial or jazz player, probably based. This was recorded in Japan, was it?
Yeah. Must
Okay.
be. Oh wait, okay,
Yeah.
here. Kazuki Katsuda?
I've heard of that name in connection, I think, with there was a band, um, it's something
There's
like
several. So
Dimensions or Dimension, maybe.
is
But
that alto? That was alto sax.
that's alto.
There
Yeah.
were two, but I don't know what the track numbers are. 11 and hold on. Now I'm curious too.
But I'm pretty sure that was that person on both of them.
Yep, same guy.
Okay.
Kazuki
Yeah.
Katsuda. Oh,
Okay.
man, that's crazy. That is preposterous to me. Like you can't even like it's one of those things where you're like that's like almost supernatural. Like it's great. Can you do that, Dan?
Heck yeah. I got a doctorate in this. There's nothing I can't do.
Well, but actually, how hard is that? Like in theory, like could one do that who isn't that player, or is it
Yes.
individual?
That is attainable. Absolutely. That would be, that's professional level jazz performance, that's modern professional level jazz performance. So, but the thing about it is that technically speaking, students are way, way ahead these days than where they were when I was in school, than where, our teachers were when they were in school. So, I mean, think back to like the 70s or 80s.
Right.
That type of solo would seem unattainable. Now, I think at the elite schools or at a really good program where you have like a jazz performance major, you probably have a few students there who could take that on.
Wow.
And could play at that level. So, but that takes nothing away from the soloist who,
No, of course.
who delivered that, in a recording session like that. And I'm sure I'll do some Googling. I'm certain that jazz and classical students have likely put up their own versions of this. Because if it's that iconic in a video game, I have to imagine that students
People
have done
attempted
that.
it. Yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah. So
1,000%.
the technique, though, the technical ability these days of younger and younger players is so high that we mentioned this last time. Saxophone is so young that we don't know what idiomatic means because, like our foundational music is from the 1930s, at least on the classical side, and on the jazz side of things, I mean, that's an art form that, again, is around 100, 120 years, depending on how you categorize it. That's so young, and there wasn't a whole lot of really great teaching and pedagogy. So we're on generation 2 or 3 of real classical and jazz pedagogy. So yeah, that's unattainable a couple generations ago. Now, yeah, that's attainable, but it's still really high level stuff.
100%.
So.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. And to your point, it's kind of, interesting as well. Like video game music's basically been around more or less since the 80s, right? And if you really think about it, that's a neonate. Like that's an embryo in terms of music. But it's interesting how video game music has this, as technology has advanced, so has the sort of the leash has become longer. I don't even think we've seen like the true evolution of like what video game music can be, but also like what does that even mean or look like, because we simply don't know, because we have all these composers that are doing all this stuff and creating these pieces of music and arrangements of it and so on and so forth, and it's like, well, they are confined to the space being digital, but like what's the frontier of that? And I don't know, it's very interesting. And again, but like this is Mario Kart. Like this is not to discredit Mario Kart, because Mario Kart's fun. We all love it. But like it's Mario Kart. Like that's crazy that they have this kind of like arriving and like it's Mario Kart. It's preposterous. It's preposterous.
As you describe, I mean, that video game music is so young. I mean, you didn't have like scores of music composition students generations ago wanting to be video game composers.
Right.
Now, I mean, it's probably just as much, if not more, than people who want to do film composition. They're interested in video game stuff, and that's where the parallel is easily drawn to saxophone, because jazz wasn't allowed in a whole lot of conservatories until like the latter part of the 20th century, because some people thought it didn't belong because it was, impure music. It was too licentious. It was all about sex, drugs, and the usual stuff. But also a lot of jazz musicians didn't want it taught in a conservatory setting, and there was that conflict. So I mean, there was no standardization of teaching for a long time, and there really kind of isn't still. But like I said, we're really only on generation maybe 2 or 3 of actual teaching of this stuff, as opposed to really great students picking it up by ear, and which is fine. But if you're going to get a degree in it, there should be a curriculum. We should know how to study it. We should think about, okay, how do you actually prepare a student to become like a studio player like this person, or to play in a fusion big band, or to play in an indie group and whatnot. And, for my classical performance majors to prepare for either grad school auditions, take military band auditions, have a studio of their own. We've not been doing that for centuries. It's not the same as like studying Bach. It's only been around for a little bit. And so, as you say, I don't think you can say where like video game music is going to be, or to achieve because I mean the sheer amount of money that's being thrown at video game music now is so different than like the video games of the 80s and the night, where it was like done on the cheap and with the basic technology, so that's kind of how I feel about playing the saxophone and saxophone teaching. You still, on our instrument, if you go and tour and perform, you're always encountering people who are hearing your instrument that way for the first time. Yeah, it's just how it is.
Yeah, it's cool. I actually love the parallels here between the two things. Since I mentioned Blue Line, I feel like I have to play it because that would be rude. This is from Gran Turismo 2, which is a racing game. Very classy. ask you a question? Do you ever feel that Kenny G did irreparable damage to like this sound?
No, I mean, I wouldn't. I don't think I could put it like that dramatically. I do,
Sorry,
because listen,
it put
I think
on
we're
the map.
He did. I think we're probably coming out of the notion that Kenny G's really controversial at this point. I don't think he is. I think some people criticize some of his artistic choices where on some albums, like he soloed over recordings of classic jazz musicians, and so his Classics in the Key of G album was the one that got a whole boatload of, and you can argue if it's appropriate to do that over Louis Armstrong, and that's, I don't know if I would ever have be willing to even touch those iconic recordings. I don't know if he's done damage at all. I think what you have to do is recognize that he played in a certain way, in a certain time and place that connected with people. You can't get around that. And no, I don't really want to sound like him. And I think, for example, the person who did this solo is much more advanced a player than Kenny is. I do think that there's room, for Kenny G being a pop saxophonist, and for, this person playing this track to clearly have some blues, gospel, and soul, influence there. I mean, you could imagine a soul singer doing most of that. It was so influenced by that style, and it's, gorgeously played, really great phrasing, well composed, really expressive, and has a lot of substance to it as well. Yeah, I mean, some moments in that are a little bit cheesy. Like you look back on it, you think, oh, okay, that's, isn't that cute? Isn't that nice? But actually, there was a lot of lyricism to it. But with Kenny G, I think most of us now can kind of put him in context, and we're kind of a generation out from him being like a really relevant saxophonist actively anymore, because he's getting up there, believe it or not. He's not a spring chicken anymore, so he's not cutting records every single Christmas. You hear less and less of him on the Weather Channel and in elevators and lobbies of hotels and whatnot. So we've kind of moved on a little bit, but I think there's a place for the way Kenny G sounds, and there's plenty of times where I listen to him and I think that works just fine.
Well, I kind of feel that way about Andrea Bocelli as a prime example. Like Andrea Bocelli, to me, as a tenor, is like, oh, Andrea Bocelli. But at the same time, like when I really take a step back, like who's a household name? Andrea Bocelli or even Pavarotti?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I that would be exactly the parallel I would draw, in that it's good, but is it representative of what you really do? Well, I mean, you and I know there's dozens of tenors who could, he just, for example, Bocelli did a version of Nessun Dorma at the opening of the Olympics. Mm-hmm. It was obviously pre-recorded because there was some syncing there. So, it was mimed. But anyway, it really connected with people, and it was a pretty good rendition of that. But you and I know that, I'll take Franco Corelli, I'll take Pavarotti, I'll take, Jussi Björling, 7 days a week and twice on Sunday, over that voice. But so many people enjoy it. It gets tenor singing on the map to people who will not encounter it otherwise. Right. And I think, is Kenny G a great jazz saxophonist? No. He's a very good pop musician, and his sound on saxophone resonated with so many millions of people.
Yeah, exactly.
It's undeniable, So I do think there's plenty of times where I enjoy listening to Kenny G. I just, generally speaking, I just don't listen to the genre of pop regularly. So it's not even like Kenny's playing. It's just, that's not really the music that gets me going. This, again, that's fantastic playing. Yep. That's fantastic writing. That's so of that style. It's exactly what you want to hear in something that's soul and, blues infused, and it's got gospel moments to it. It's just, that's great.
Isn't it interesting that it's in a racing game? Like there's a degree of the elegance, that I think like it's very interesting knowing the context of like Gran Turismo is this sort of like, very classy, very like, the grandfather of it's not really the grandfather of racing games, but it has this sort of like, this, the velvet, the whiskey, it's very refined, and I feel like Blue Line really leans into that in a big way, and it's really successful at it too.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't think of a racing game when I heard that. I mean, it's just it was so reflective. It was like almost nostalgic at times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so. Maybe there's like a really poignant emotional moment in this racing. I have no idea, but that's not the sort of thing that you would have like a Formula One driver playing in their car, going hundreds of miles an hour, just leaning back into the soul and just having a good time.
And if Kenny G or Kenny G's estate is watching this, I meant no offense to Kenny G with my question. I mostly meant it in jest.
Oh well, yeah, he's got enough money. He could have us all killed, and no one any be the wiser. So yeah,
this one might be weird. Let's do this. This is Clayman's theme from a game called Neverhood. Another song I've heard from this game is them coughing. It's like blues, but they're coughing. Literally, this is the first time I've ever done one of these where I've known basically none of the songs. Except I knew Blue Line, but I forgot it. That's per usual. All right, I was about to say, that's clarinet. Wait. Okay.
Well, what I like is that along with the variety of stuff we've gotten to today, now we're highlighting, the low end of the saxophones, where it's just, that was entirely in the basement on it difficult to tell because it hung so low for so long. That was either low bari or bass. I couldn't quite tell. It's more common to have bari sax, but that got, so it's a little hard to tell, but, yeah, I mean, it's clearly a very somewhat off-kilter, humorous sort of take on that. It's got a lot of quirkiness to it. It's the interesting use of, I think it was banjo with the clarinet most of the time. And that, like you said, on another one, I think of these, you said there was coughing. There was some breath sounds from the vocalist there too. And I mean, it's kind of funny because in that register on Barry, I always think when you articulate like that, it just sounds like there's a bullfrog around. Sort of thing. I feel like what you hear so it sounds like we were by a pond, and the bullfrogs were out mating or whatever. And then I think at one point there was maybe a soprano that was playing in octaves with it. I couldn't tell what that top instrument was. Yeah, lots of fun, and that's a good highlight of that's the character of low saxophone. It's almost reminds you of like instruments get so like applied to a certain character or a certain type. The awful ones are like the piece Tubby the Tuba, so you all can Google and listen to some Tubby the Tuba later on. But that's Barry Sax sort of goofy bass line sort of playing, that's a lot of fun. I thought that was really good. And the players are good. They were having some fun. They were bending pitches, adding a little bit of a little bit of humor to it. So yeah, a lot of fun.
So ultimately, I mean, like, I think like what I'm gathering is that now obviously your focus has been largely classical saxophone.
Yeah.
If I recall, you're basically forced to be open-minded as a saxophone player, because you can't just silo yourself because of the nature of the saxophone. Like, you would have to play something like this and put a smile on. And would you enjoy something like this?
I would. You have to enjoy it for what it's worth. I love playing Barry, and I've gotten to a couple of times play Barry in a funk setting, which is always so much fun.
Oh my God!
Those are such great lines.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right in that when you're a saxophonist, if you decide to pigeonhole yourself early on, I mean, you are just going to be such a hyper specialist. It's difficult to imagine like how you're going to work at all. Yes, at a certain point, as you advance, you have to find your niche, what you're really good at. But you can't do that if you shut your ears off to all sides of the instrument. My first lessons were jazz soprano lessons. I began on jazz. I've always loved that, and I was a student of those recordings forever, and I still am. It's just that I got bitten by the classical bug in terms of not just listening, because we always had classical music on in the house. There was always some sort of records or eventually CDs that we were listening to. We'd go to live concerts. We saw the Boston Pops, the New York Phil, the Met, the Philadelphia Orchestra playing at Saratoga Springs in the summer, which is always a hoot. But I was late to classical saxophone, at least compared to my jazz upbringing. But once I kind of discovered the sounds that were there for classical saxophone, it was like this unexplored sort of, forest of sounds. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting, and so I ended up specializing that way. But yeah, you have to keep an open mind and realize that it's great that saxophone works just as well with Bruce Springsteen as it does, in a mixed chamber, in a mixed chamber ensemble with violin and piano or whatever, So we've got options. You can be everything from, a stodgy old classical player like me to Clarence Clemens with Bruce, or with Kenny G and, all the mainstream jazz folks and everything in between. So you have to listen really omnivorously. It's not super specialized training on saxophone. It's not like, you tell someone, I want to be an opera singer. That is specialized training. Yeah. Even though there are centuries of opera now, it's not literally just one voice type. That's super specialized. If you say you want to be a saxophonist, yes, at a certain point you have to know what you're best at, but you do need a really curious ears, and you need that sort of curiosity to listen openly and think, that works in that context. And I've had just as much fun, nowadays, primarily as a chamber musician. I play with my quartet. I didn't think that was going to be my primary performer. I thought I was going to be a solo player. Back when I was in my teens, I thought I was going to be a jazz player. You stay open, you find what you enjoy, you find what you're good at, and you stick with it. But that can't happen if you decide that, oh, I'm above this, or this music's beneath me, or all that crap. Even as a stodgy old classical music collector, as you see behind me, I'll listen to anything and try and find what I enjoy about it. And it's very rare that I'll just put something down. We can say that, for example, the MIDI track we listened to earlier, that's very simplistic writing. That is an impression of kind of jazz writing, but again, context matters, and what were they going for, and what did they have at their disposal? They didn't have probably the money to book a jazz combo for several recording sessions to play the whole thing. Right. And so I've enjoyed hearing jazz and heavy metal just as much as I enjoy hearing it in symphony orchestra.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things that I'm, not predisposed, but less likely to like. But also to your point, it's interesting how we can't shut ourselves off to, and I think part of that's just forced exposure. Like Strauss. Take Strauss. Ariadne auf Naxos, the first time I ever heard it, I was preparing it for one of the smaller roles. I just closed the book and I said no. Mm-hmm. I said absolutely not. I'm not interested in this. Come back 2 months later, saw the performance. It wasn't even the context; it was the music. There's you've heard it a million times, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah, you know the part where they go da-dee-da-dee-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da. Fuck, dude, it's one of the most magical things I've ever fucking heard in my entire life. And in that moment, and I remember I was going through it with my anxiety and stuff really intensively at the time, and that felt. I was sitting in the back of the theater, and I didn't care about the state. I could barely see it, but it was the music sort of washing over me. And I was like, oh, I'm an idiot. Like, this is incredibly complex. This is gorgeous, sumptuous music that is literally taking me to another dimension, right? My life is the context. And it, you know, so all that to say, like, it's important for us to be open-minded and, you know, even if for instance, this series, you know, this non-gamer series, like I used to do one once, maybe twice a month. Now I do them every week. And because I found that this is like the call is actually this, to introduce people, to discuss, to have the back and forth, to have the conversations. It's so much more meaningful to sit down and have a dialogue with somebody, because I'm learning things from you, just like you may learn something from me, and vice versa. You know what I mean? Like, exactly. That's the beauty of, and I find that in our ever-present online culture, more and more as we become more siloed in our own individual holes, our foxholes, it becomes harder and harder to reach out a hand and say, hey, like, who cares? Just listen to the conversation, listen to the music, listen to what do you feel? It doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to be that. It's about, anyway.
Yeah, no, and I was thinking about that very same thing when I was, when I watched our first episode back, just to see how well that was edited to make me seem coherent and not a dittering old professor who can't shut up half the time. But, I was thinking that... Well. It was very, very well edited. I hope the same this time. But anyway, what I was thinking is that actually what you've done with this series, at least to my mind, it's kind of like back in the day when, like, you would literally, like, wait in line to buy the new album, buy the new CD in person of your favorite artist, or even if you were waiting in line, you knew when it came out, you'd go to the record store, you'd get and then you just invite a buddy over and you would listen. You would hang out, of course, you would shoot the shit and you would have a good time. Yeah. But the whole point of getting together was just to listen to the album. And I was thinking that that's kind of what you've created here, is that it's just two people having a really friendly conversation, two buds that have known each other for, 20 some odd years now, and just listening to music, getting reactions to it, sharing opinions. It's kind of like recreating what I remember, with my high school buddies, which was let's get the new album. If it was a soundtrack, if it was a new Michael Brecker album, I always forced my friends to listen to Brecker because I was such a gung-ho jazz fan, and I converted a few of them. But it was like, let's just hang over and put the album on, and that's what you did. That was the hang. It was so I was just thinking that's kind of what we've done here. And also what this is it's an honest reaction. It's seeing someone else's honest reaction to something that you already live in. You live in the video game music world, like you're familiar with all the players, and you get an honest reaction to your stuff. I always loved external honest reactions. A lot of times when I was buying a new instrument and I was play testing it, I sent some recordings of me playing several instruments. I sent it to the girl I was seeing at the time, who is not a musician at all. And I said, I want your reaction. Just listen to these two. Don't edit. Just tell me what you think. And those were like some of the best reactions. And they picked right. They picked exactly right.
Because it's raw. Because no matter what, whether a person knows or doesn't know, or knows the technique, or knows all the incredible minutia that goes into whatever, at the end of the day, people still have instinct. They still have feeling. And I think, like, that's why I'm so obsessed with the emotional aspects, because it's like, I did the technique stuff for 14 years. And honestly, the technique stuff, how far did it really get me? I mean, like, all it really did was get me stuck in my head. And all I really wanted to do was express. And you can express in like 100 different ways without having to go to conservatory and get your whole life fucked up. You know what I mean? Like there's a whole way to do things. And I think, like, that's why having conversation and having a natural reaction, but also having, like, because we're still investigating, and that's really ultimately what it's all about. Let's pivot over to this. This is from Halo. Surely
I've heard of Halo.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is from Halo 3 ODST. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Well, that is definitely a real saxophone. But I know precisely why maybe folks would hear it because it does sound like the audio was in the mixing or the mastering. It sounds like there was a little bit of added quality to that, which they always do in studio sessions. So some of that, yes, seemed a little bit managed. But there's a couple of things that are very difficult for programs to synthesize, and one is spit. So he actually, and whoever played this, started with some on the reed for a little bit of texture. So that's actually quite difficult to program. And also the key noise. When he went between registers, you could hear a little bit of that. So, but yeah, I spent a lot of time last time trying to draw parallels to like the music I was already familiar with. And with this one, I thought a lot of like Michael Nyman's music, who's a British composer, uses jazz and minimalism really well. Wrote a really great score to the movie The Piano and has these sort of looping strings, and a sustained melody over it done in a very minimalist sort of way. The ostinatos repeat and then you just have this soaring melody over it. And then you'll just get this really bare reflective moment in his music. And that's kind of how the saxophone, the piano was done here. Yeah. And again, this is another instance where it sounds like the saxophone was essentially being used in place of a singer. It sounded like those were like vocal inflections that were given to saxophone because we can mimic a lot of singing styles really well. So I thought it was nice. It was very stripped down to just the essential parts, but when it had texture and layering, it was really well conceived. So, and well played.
What I find really interesting about this piece is it's one of those pieces that the more I've listened to it, the more I've come to appreciate it. It is a gorgeous, sumptuous piece, and I absolutely love if I recall, Marty does have a classical background, or certainly Marty, if you're watching this, which Marty does like to pop in, and especially with stuff relating to his music, just give me a refresher. But I'm positive that there's a classical music influence in his. It's interesting because it kind of has this generally like this beautiful fusion element to it, where it feels classical, but it also feels like a little bit of jazz, this sort of influence in there. And I just adore because you're right, it is really stripped back, but the whole like pring, pring, pring. And then when we get it, so that's like the like, I don't know, you can really see it. You see like the barren wasteland of after a battle, and you're just sitting there exhausted. You take off your your helmet, and then you like look up and da 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 ya da 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 dee da, and then the saxophone is almost like the character, like you're looking at a character, and I know it's Master Chief, obviously the guy with the green outfit, but there's this subtle like stillness in it. That's
difficult to do well. That's why I said it's stripped down to the bare essentials. Yeah. And that type of writing is super difficult with writing simply for a few instruments. And that's how he kind of bookended this track really well. Yeah. And then, the middle had a little bit more activity to it and texturing, and writing simply is not so simple. It's usually to get that right, and not make it seem dull or just really dumbed down or anything. And that was it seemed like a very reflective moment. I don't know the plot at all, but it seemed like this was pictures running in the mind of some sort of memory of a loved one, or like a horrible thing that happened and that sort of thing. And so it had a lot of weight to it. And I thought as he built in the motion in the added parts in the middle, I thought that was a nice transition. And then it ending the way it did, was just a well thought out 3 minutes. Really nice. And well done.
Really nice. Also too, like it's like the epitome of the sandwich technique, the sandwich where you kind of start one way, reset, and then have the climax, the sandwich, the meat is the middle, which just has that emphasis, and then we kind of that there's the bread in the end, right? So it has that. I don't think it was quite identical, but maybe it was an open face sandwich. But point is that like there's this really nice more than anything, it's the subtle use of dynamics that I think is really, really exceptional, because there is that push and pull of dynamics is something that I think sometimes we can easily not feel in video game music. But this the crescendo, micro crescendo here, a pull, a push, and a slight sforzando and the pullback. Like it's just really. These are such subtle things that are, I think Marty really nails it. Yeah, let's do the Face of the Void, the Face of the Deep from Risk of Rain 2 Survivors of the Void. Again, guys, I literally am looking at I'm looking at Hades, I'm looking at Donkey Kong Country, I'm looking at Rabbit and Steel, I'm looking at Partito the Merchant, I'm looking at Brilliant Wings from Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I'm looking at The Dragon Gave a Loud Scream, I'm looking at Pokemon Coliseum. I would love it, if Dan and I had unlimited time. Boy, would it be fun. I really appreciate all of your suggestions. If Dan wants to come back a third time, well, by all means, we will get it done. Let's listen to The Face of the Deep. Is that crazy?
Not really. That's run of the mill metal saxophone. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't even know that existed because I first heard this the other day at the gym, and I was like, "Bro, what the?
It's good gym music. Yeah,
yeah.
It will put you slightly off kilter when you're working out because a lot of that's in 5. So it's not totally. Yeah. So, but anyway, essentially, in that style of playing, you're called on to become like your own distortion pedal. So a lot of those effects, the sort of screaming gestures and whatnot, there was some growling or essentially when you growl on the saxophone, you sustain the note and you hum. Yeah. And you get this sort of dissonance happening there. It's like humming and whistling, sort of thing. So you get the difference tone between the notes. There was moments of just like vocal gestures, like essentially as we discussed with not a metal but like a more rock influenced one, you're kind of mimicking the way that guitarists solo in this style of music, so laying on the distortion, letting it get a little bit wild in the upper register, letting it where pitch stops being completely relevant and it's more about the gesture. Again, a nice like use of the saxophone in that genre where, just put us in. We don't need all the pedals. We'll do it ourselves. We'll do it right back here. Make all that happen through the instrument. So
does it sound more difficult than it actually is?
Yes.
Okay. So it's actually not that hard to do all that, but that's like, obviously there's good playing, but like.
Yeah. It's very well played. But in terms of like degree of difficulty, I would probably put kind of like the hard bop stuff that we heard earlier, and also the Dolphin Shoals lick as like, that's probably like the altissimo licks in that solo would probably be along with the solo that we heard from the group I think it was for that, was it for that comic book or
for Cowboy Bebop?
For Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. I think those would be quite a bit more difficult. But yeah, the extended techniques that you heard there, they take a little while to learn. You're not born growling on a woodwind instrument. You're not born with the ability to flutter tongue or to make the crazy voicing leaps into that upper register work. It's very good playing and appropriate for the style. A lot of the soloing and that type of music that musicians do borders on what we would know as either the avant-garde in classical or completely free jazz, where it's not always about the pitch content. It's more about just the actual tone or sound quality and the register and the gesture, less worried about, sticking within the chord changes and whatever, that sort of thing. So it's, it broaches on that. And it's amazing how similar a lot of that stuff ends up sounding, where it's conceived of completely differently, where you'll have like an entirely mathematically derived classical piece. Yeah. And then, it has a bunch of sound, and then you'll hear a free jazz. And then you'll hear like a little bit in like aggressive metal music. And man, there's not a whole lot of daylight between these. It's actually, even though they're thought of completely differently. Yeah, I thought that was another good use of the saxophone. It sounded like alto to me. And very well delivered. Yeah.
Was there a track today that stood out to you the most?
I think it's probably it's like a 3-way tie at the moment. I think it's probably the Cowboy Bebop tune,
Tank,
of
course.
Awesome big band chart, great solo. Dolphin Shoals,
sick,
both of those from Mario Kart. That's incredible that's Mario Kart music. That's ridiculous. I know. that's effing ridiculous. And that I would put the kind of the more lyrical tune from Gran Turismo up there too. I thought in all cases that's just such a good showing of the saxophone. It uses the instrument, all the registers, all the inflections. It's not just mechanical. It's expressive of different things, of course, but it's. I thought those are probably like the top 3 for me. But I'm always interested to hear music like this last one too, just because it's, we're not done figuring out what the saxophone can sound like. And so it's just amazing recently, like the influential saxophonist making crazy sound effects is Leo P, doing these crazy harmonic, we knew of back in the day. They were called harmonic smears, where if you look him up, you'll find his videos on Instagram, TikTok. He's just all over social media. He's got a gazillion followers. And he started off making these crazy, like trance metal fusion, everything. It's possible to call it a genre on Barry, and he just get these low notes out. And what he does is he goes up the overtone series while holding out the low notes. So you get this real like overtone multiphonic sort of thing. And it's this, no one was really doing that regularly, or at least in solo playing, you know. And then if folks want to pursue even more in the like what saxophone can sound like, not really within a classical setting, Colin Stetson is another one to listen to, who would do, you know, entire concerts on bass saxophone and just looping it. He had, you know, live looping stuff and doing all the sound effects, and, you know, just it's kind of impressive. And then, of course, we've got all the crazy avant-garde music from the 60s and 70s where it was quarter tone, slap tongues, you know, multiphonics and, you know, growling, screaming, doing all this crazy stuff. And so I like, you know, hearing a little bit of that in something that's clearly metal, you know, influenced.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really incredible thing that we have these representers of what like good. We're not always there with opera, if I'm honest, like, and also like just the general like understanding of what opera is or should sound like, I think is sometimes hit or miss. Like unfortunately there's quite a few recordings that I think are not great in terms of actual operatic, like the sound, the timbre, like the ideal timbre. Like it can be interesting, but it's not necessarily like really a perfect representer. But I mean, to me, obviously I'm not a saxophone expert, but based on what I've gathered from you today, like there are some really significant showings of saxophone playing that are actually like basically giving an audience an education on the possibilities of what saxophone can be, which is great. And I think like a really fun thing, and why I was excited to have you on again, because we listened to several in that previous video that you guys should definitely check out, because we listened to like King of Fighters, Jack and Dandy. There were a couple others, but it really felt, even though we couldn't listen to everything in its completion here, I felt like we got a wide swath of saxophone playing in this particular episode, which is amazing. Yeah. Well, do you think you're going to continue your video game music education?
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah. I mean, the fact that people have come up with hundreds of suggestions for
628. I mean, some repeats, but generally it was like all.
And the comment section on the first video is just chock full of them too. It's just there's so much, and so it's great to see that there's so much enthusiasm for that, and that people are that educated about what's out there. So I mean, that's usually the role that I play with classical music, is that, I've got all this knowledge, how best to disseminate it to someone who I'm trying to, you know, and so that's been done really well, because probably in video game music, there's probably not a whole lot of regular use of what we would know as like mainstream classical saxophone. That's probably still maybe a bit of an obscurity, but working in the more commercial saxophone sounds with like orchestra settings, with singers, with whatnot, it shows the versatility of it, and it's fun to hear it with no context, and then to be told, and it's for this. Like if you had played me that Mario Kart, I would not think that this is freaking Mario Kart music. I mean, like that's a lot of effort, you know, for such a silly, you know, it's a fun game. At least Mario Kart 64 was. I remember that well, but I wouldn't think of ever putting like that much attention to it, like that much high level attention to detail for a Mario Kart game. That's fantastic. You know, usually what you think of like the epic, the big, you know, spenders on soundtracks are usually like fantasy, you know, sci-fi, stuff like that, you know, where they pull out all the stops and you get like this Wagner opera worth of soundtracking. Getting a real high level, like big band for the Cowboy Bebop, and getting super high level studio players, it sounds like, for Mario Kart and for the Gran Turismo one. That's it. It makes everything better, and also that you could tell those are people playing. That's human music making. That's not synthesized. It's where, in comparison, like the MIDI stuff, when you listen to it next to that sort of thing, it's that you're kind of robbed of something when it's just all mechanical, but it's supposed to be trying to express something human. Yeah. You know, even though maybe there was some audio stuff done in the Halo soundtrack, that was very emotive, that was very human, that was very raw, something that's that nostalgic, and then something that's as silly but fun as like Mario Kart. It's still, that expression is coming from a person, you know, in a studio setting, yes, but a person wrote that, a person played that. And you were kind of saying this before, like when there's little bits of micro phrasing and there's little bits of push and you know, push and pull, and it's not just like press play and then the music happens, whatever. There's those human gestures where it sounds like when it's a human saxophonist playing, it should, in a lot of cases, sound super vocal. It should sound sung. Even when you're playing at your fastest and most technical, the technique is a great delivery vehicle for expression. It's not an end in and of itself.
Exactly.
And that's what it's supposed to be. And all the technical playing we heard, does that. Delivered and expression.
But also spoken like a true saxophone player, that you don't care if it's done in a studio, because at the end of the day, like, it's amazing when you get at a classical, like a hardcore classical person that's like, well, the only good performance is a live, real performance. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Yeah, it can, but like if you get a real musician in the studio who knows what they're doing, I could give two shits if it's live or not. You know what I mean? Like you don't need to go to a live concert in order to feel the human output.
No, it's a different experience.
Right.
We all know going to a great live performance it's not the same as sitting, with a recording, but sitting with a great recording can be a transformative, expressive experience. But yeah, a live concert can be great. It can be crap, but it's an event. You're participating in that moment in time.
Right.
Whereas when you listen to a great recording, that if it's great, you can live with that, and you play it on repeat. You listen to it every day. If you're obsessed with it, like I am, when I get a new recording, and like that's what I'm hearing as I'm eating lunch, as I'm having breakfast or whatever. So, no, a great recording is a hugely expressive thing. And yes, a great live performance, it's just a different experience. And what makes a great live performance might not make for awesome repeated listening. In a live performance, I'll give, carte blanche, go for it and epically miss it, but go for it. It's okay. It happens to us all. Live performance happens, and you absolutely biff that moment. But there's also these wonderful other moments where that you've never played it that way before, but that the moment takes you. But that doesn't always make for great repeated listening.
Right.
To have a great studio recording. I mean, speaking as someone who's done that with my group and done it on other people's stuff, that takes a lot of effort, and it's not any less expressive. It's just done to a slightly different goal. That's all.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautifully put, and I think really educational for everyone watching. It's amazing. Well, thanks, Dan, again, for coming back. We really appreciate it. I know that people were really excited to have you back. So a year later, but we did it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. This was really, really fun. I feel like we really just hit the. I mean, as I told you, obviously we were going to get to 600 tracks, but I feel like we got a really good identifier of what the saxophone is capable of, and it was great to have such a professional like yourself here. So thank you, everybody. Like I said, Tank is on the patreon.com/MarcoMeatball, totally free. If that's something that you like, and the idea of like tossing a couple one or two anime tracks, definitely let me know in the comments. Thanks a ton, and we'll see you later. See you guys. Bye.